Tony,
David, hi.
I got a good one for you.
Okay.
So we talked about context, but it seems like, the real point of concern on the rubric is the complexity point. Any reliable strategies for picking up that point?
So, if by reliable strategy you mean, is there a formula that you can follow to get complexity every time? The answer is no. It is by definition complex. And in fact, it's a serious historical thinking skill to be able to recognize the complexity in the argument. Generally speaking, the way complexity works is, although I am supporting a specific claim using the evidence, I also am acknowledging that this evidence could be used to support an alternative claim. One example could be, I think in a previous video I mentioned the defenestration of Prague as a cause for the 30 Years' War. It was kind of the trigger. You could argue that the defenestration of Prague is an example of politics as a cause for the 30 Years' War, because the people of Bohemia wanted a specific ruler, and they had another Habsburg ruler being imposed on them, and so maybe that's a political thing, right? On the other hand, you could also argue that the real distinction between these two rulers was that one was a Protestant, and the one that was being imposed on the Protestant people of Bohemia was a Catholic. And so maybe religion was the cause for the 30 Years' War. So acknowledging that the evidence can be used to support both of those claims is one way to go after complexity.
Okay, and you can do that right in the thesis.
Yeah. In fact, I teach my kids to write essentially what I call a 2-to-1 thesis. So the easiest way to understand this is, if you had a compare and contrast question, you might write a thesis with a claim, and your line of reasoning would have 3 categories of evidence. The first 2 might be to compare, that is to show the similarities, and the third might be to show the differences. So I'm actually going to point out that the argument can go both ways. To what extent, I would say to the extent that this and this is true, then this claim is true. But to the extent that this other thing is true, then a counterclaim is true. And you can do the same thing with a question that says, in what ways? Even though it's not strictly asking for a 2-to-1, you can open with a 2-to-1 by saying, well, in these 2 ways, what you asked is true, but there is this other way of looking at it. And I like the 2-to-1 thesis because in the body of your essay, as you're analyzing the documents, you're already setting up a complex argument. And then if you, basically to get the point, if you explicitly explain this argument, especially the transition from the first 2 categories to the third category, if you do a good job of showing that transition, then that's where you pick up the complexity point.
Gotcha. All right. Sounds like a piece of cake.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about a piece of cake, but it's definitely doable. And remember, as we said before, I mean, the first 9 points you can pick up literally in the first 2 paragraphs of your essay. So, if you really think about this complexity point and you're very intentional moving into that next paragraph, you should be able to get it.
Sounds like the key is to plan your essay from the beginning.
Absolutely. Planning. I just went over this again with my students, and that is that you can't skip the steps. Pre-writing is essential. If you forego the pre-writing, you're going to end up with a bad essay, and a bad essay stays bad no matter how quickly you finish it.